Welcome back to the series of Diagnosing the Characters. It's been more than a few years since the last Diagnosing the Characters update. Actually, it's just been years since I've posted in general, but she's here now, so let's just start again. Let's just rewind. But if you're new here, then you probably haven't seen my last update to the series, which was just me diagnosing Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So be sure to check that out. Also, if you have any suggestions for other characters that you'd like me to try my hand at, don't be shy and leave a comment down below and let your girl know. You guys did leave a good few suggestions last time, Dabi being one, and I think Akira was another one that stuck out. But yeah, like last time, I'm just going to do a quick disclaimer. I am not a psychologist and I'm not studying to become one, so take everything that I say with a grain of salt. I just have an unnatural fascination with psychology and no more free time on my hands, so I'm barely making it work. Dabi is a fascinating individual, and I feel like a lot of that does stem from how mysterious he is. However, naturally, the mystery comes with a lot of misconceptions on his character, since we don't see the full picture, just the villainous side really until the latest season. But curiosity is part of human nature, so we're constantly trying to connect the meaning between things, and based off of his long list of villainous acts, such as the infamous child napping, murders, attempted murder, etc., all of which he does with no emotion or too much emotion at inappropriate times, he naturally gets labelled psychopath, sociopath and narcissist quite a lot. I do a deeper delve into what constitutes each of these diagnoses in my other videos, but the overlapping traits between them is the lack of empathy and grandiose sense of self, which I guess his actions on a surface level would indicate. However, I want to negate those hypotheses because, for one, he doesn't have a grandiose sense of self. If anything, I think he's got a distorted self-image. And two, I do think he has empathy but has fluctuations in his empathetic abilities depending on the situation or his emotional state. And I guess that begs the question of why would I think that? Well, because I believe that Dabi has borderline personality disorder, also known as BPD. Once again, we're dealing with a highly stigmatized and misunderstood disorder. One of many misconceptions is that it's not common in men and mainly pertains to women, which is actually why it's frequently misdiagnosed. I feel like one of the reasons for this stems from the fact that BPD demonstrates a lot of traits, which I'll get into, but it showcases traits that overlap with other mental illnesses, such as histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and even bipolar disorder. So it's more common than not for practitioners to misdiagnose BPD in men as one of the aforementioned disorders before considering the possibility of BPD. But I believe the main reason for misdiagnosis is how drastically different BPD can manifest itself. BPD umbrellas 4 different subtypes: impulsive, petulant, discouraged, and the self-destructive type. They all share the same key underlying traits of emotional and interpersonal dysregulation, but the difference lies in how they manifest themselves. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's just backpedal a little bit. So what is BPD? BPD is a personality disorder that is marked by emotional dysregulation, heavily affecting the person's ability to control their emotions. This leads to unstable relationships with others and even themselves. This unstable self-image or sense of self is clinically referred to as identity disturbance. However, like any other disorder, there are certain criteria one has to meet in order to be diagnosed. For BPD, there are a total of 9 characteristics, of which you'll need a minimum of 5 to be diagnosed. So these traits are a fear of abandonment. This may look like drastic measures to prevent real or imagined abandonment, unstable relationships. What this looks like is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships, which can be differentiated through alternating extremes of idealization and devaluation. Another trait would be unstable identity. So this is when someone consistently has an unstable self-image or sense of self. I understand that not knowing who you are sounds relatively mundane and like a normal part of the journey of life, but I just want to emphasize that any symptoms of mental disorders are measured in extremes. And then we have impulsive behavior, self-harm, extreme mood swings, chronic emptiness, and extreme anger. Not much explanation is needed for the rest of these, although Dabi does not tick the box for all these traits. He visibly exhibits 5 of them throughout the show: a fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, unstable identity, and or identity disturbance, self-harm, and extreme anger. However, before I delve any further into these symptoms, it is very important for us to loosely understand the inner workings of his father, Enji Todoroki, i.e. Endeavor's psyche, as it plays a vital role in the family system, hence Dabi's childhood. I believe Endeavor is a narcissist, so narcissism and narcissistic family dynamics will be making a reappearance. If you've watched my last installment in the series about Azula, you'll know that I've already touched on these topics quite a bit. Anyways, Endeavor is a communal narcissist in the earlier seasons. Unlike the stereotypical grandiose narcissist, the communal narcissist gets their self-worth by being perceived as a pro-social individual, by helping and saving others through various means such as charity, for example. In Endeavor's case, this would be his hero work. However, the communal narcissist completely abandons this pro-social facade behind closed doors, as seen in the show many times. But then I believe he later experiences a narcissistic collapse, which is a phenomenon that occurs when the narcissist experiences a severe blow to their ego, preventing them from maintaining their grandiose and confident persona. The narcissist, in this case Endeavor, may feel like their entire sense of self has been pulled out from under them, as their sense of self-worth is based on people's interpretation of them. This can cause a spiral that leads them to feel alone and empty and can result in depression and, in some severe cases, suicide. Endeavor's identity was tied to being the only one who could surpass the number one hero at the time, All Might, and become the new symbol of peace. But now that All Might has retired and he's automatically bumped up to the new number one hero, now this identity has collapsed. Not only does he recognize the spot was not earned, but so does the public, as to add insult to injury, he is not regarded as the new symbol of peace by the public, despite being the new number one hero. But yeah, I do not want to go into too much depth about Endeavor because it'll make this video ridiculously long, and it's already going to be a fairly longer video. So yeah, Endeavor is not the focus here. He needs his own video. So let me know if you guys would actually want to see that. Anyways, as established before, there are two main roles the narcissist uses to assign to his family members: the black sheep and or scapegoat, or the golden child. Although there are several other roles that the narcissist can assign to his children, these two roles are most commonly seen in narcissistic families, as they are the easiest dynamics to establish in a household and the easiest way for them to receive narcissistic supply. Now, let's examine the Todoroki family dynamics. Interestingly enough, in his early childhood, Dabi was assigned the role of the golden child. However, neither one of his siblings, Fuyumi and or Natsuo, were assigned the position of the black sheep. Instead, they both played the role of the lost or invisible child, which is another role that can be seen in narcissistic family systems. The lost or invisible child is what it sounds like. They are not seen or hardly ever acknowledged by the narcissistic parent. They are more or less forgotten in the family system. And although it may not sound too bad a role to have, as they are not forced to live up to the narcissist's unrealistic expectations like the golden child, or subject to the wrath like the black sheep, they are funnily enough still heavily and negatively impacted by the narcissistic parents' inaction. Children learn to regulate their emotions when their behavior is noticed. So if a child's behavior is left unnoticed by an emotionally unavailable parent, the child is going to have a shaky sense of self, as they are essentially left to navigate life on their own. As a result of this, the lost child can take two paths. Either they rebel by engaging in self-sabotaging acts, or lash out in a desperate attempt to be noticed by the narcissistic parent, or they become very selfless and almost subservient because they don't want to ignite the narcissistic parent's wrath, so they try to remain invisible. This may look like putting other people's needs before their own, as they learn from an early age that they don't really matter. This is demonstrated in the show. We see both manifestations of the lost child. In Fuyumi, we see someone that puts the family's needs before her own by ignoring her trauma and practically taking on this mother role in an attempt to keep this figurative sense of peace that she thinks the family has. Then we have Natsuo, who is constantly verbally lashing out in fits of anger, trying to get some kind of reaction from his father, which he never gets. It's also mentioned that he becomes very distant after going going to college, heavily implying that he'd go long periods of time without family contact. Once again, this can arguably be seen as another attempt at seeking attention and being brought up in conversation, which Endeavour once again does not give, nor does he do. So it can be gauged that there are no scapegoats at this point in time within the Todoroki siblings dynamic, which is a little unconventional, as the narcissist normally likes to actively pit their children against one another, hence the black sheep, as it is a way for them to cultivate chaos, which allows them to control the narrative of the family. And we know that control equals narcissistic supply. So yes, it is odd for a narcissistic family system to lack a scapegoat, until you realize that none of the children are the scapegoat. The mom, or the mother, Rei Todoroki, is the black sheep of the family. Endeavour constantly physically and emotionally abuses her. He claims that she's to blame for why his children are weak, as they've inherited her weak constitution. Even Toya blames her for everything. There's a point in time when none of her children want anything to do with her. Shortly after, Endeavour admits her into a psychiatric hospital, further isolating her from the family system. So now that we've established the family dynamic during Dabi's formative years, we can now start dissecting his 5 BPD traits, which I believe began manifesting during his childhood. Let's start with his fear of abandonment. A fear of abandonment is practically an innate characteristic for the golden child to have. Since the narcissistic parent only views the golden child as an extension of themselves, their relationship is solely built on a conditional and or transactional love, i.e. how well they do in academics, sports, in this case, heroing. They learn from an early age that meeting the narcissist's unrealistic expectations is the only way to secure love and attention from them. Therefore, failure to meet those expectations leads to rejection and abandonment from the parent. From a ridiculously young age, Endeavour placed ridiculously high expectations on Dabi to surpass the number one hero at the time, in which Dabi desperately tries to deliver on, as he sees the preferential treatment that he gets from his father in comparison to his other siblings. So naturally, like any child would, he yearns for that parental affection. He understands that his failures will result in his abandonment, which inevitably works towards his own detriment. As soon as it is revealed that his quirk is not compatible with his body's constitution, and Shoto is born with a better quirk than him, he is no longer of use to Endeavour, or serving as narcissistic supply. Therefore, he is tossed to the side. He's tragically hyper aware of this truth as a child, propelling him to go as far as self-mutilating himself by burning himself in hopes of not being abandoned. Now, let's explore Dabi's unstable self-image and or identity disturbance. The golden child doesn't have much of an identity outside of appeasing the narcissistic parent. Since their sense of self has always been tailored around the narcissistic parent's interests, values, and expectations, this disillusionment inevitably presents as an issue once the golden child grows up and goes out into the real world. This is even further exasperated when the golden child's status is suddenly revoked, without much of an explanation, leaving the child disgruntled and confused. Once again, this is seen in the show. For years, Endeavour grooms Dabi to become his successor. He's literally bred in every sense of the word for this purpose. However, once it is discovered that his quirk actually harms him, he is discarded. But those goals and delusions of grandeur, essentially, that Endeavour has been feeding him don't just up and vanish. They aren't discarded from Dabi's mind. However, for the first time, Dabi is doused with the stark reality that he isn't as important as he was conditioned to believe. And this new truth is naturally confusing for any child. So what does he do? Instead of facing the new dark truth, he latches onto the old lie, as it's most easiest for him to wrap his head around. He just needs to prove that he's worthy of love, i.e. performance equals love. This unstable sense of self is also prevalent in his adulthood. Even after coming to the conclusion that Endeavour is the root cause of his issues, instead of choosing to heal, he centers his new goal of life around taking down his father as an act of revenge. But ultimately, although unknowingly, he's placing Endeavour at the center of his existence again, unconsciously fulfilling the prophecy of the golden child. So we can surmise that Dabi not having a sense of self outside of his father is the most obvious example of his identity disturbance. But there are other, more subtler examples of things that Dabi does which showcases his unstable sense of self. For example, he changes his name from Toya Todoroki to Dabi. He dyes his hair. These are all common behavioral patterns tied tied to identity disturbance. I know it can be argued that a lot of people dye their hair and change their names, but context is important. It is normal to dye your hair because you want to try something different and new, but ultimately you are still you because you have a solid sense of self. You recognize that dyeing your hair isn't going to physically make you into a new person. You may look different, but you are inherently you. It is not to symbolize the death of a person, aka Toya Todoroki. Normal people aren't wired to think like that. But anyways, I've spent a lot of time on this trait, so let's move on to the next trait of BPD, unstable relationships. This goes hand in hand with a fear of abandonment. Our views on relationships are shaped and cultivated from earlier on, which is not just during our childhood, but foremost from our parents, because that's the first real relationship any child is exposed to. And it's safe to say that Dabi has not had a stable relationship throughout his formative years and into adulthood. All his relationships have been transactional, both then and now. His father used him for his own selfish ambitions, and in return, he got love. He lets the league use him and arguably corrupt him. In turn, he gets to cripple hero society, hence Endeavor, as he is a hero in said society. He uses Hawks for intel on the heroes. Hawks uses him as his gateway into the league. I think the picture has been painted. But aside from the obvious instability from transactional relationships, I'd like to draw attention to how Dabi has a tendency to idealize and then devalue his relationships. Most obvious examples would be his relationship with Endeavor. At first, he loves and respects him so much to the point of putting himself on the line to keep it, then to hating him so much to the point that he's willing to put his life on the line to kill him. Another example would be his relationship with his siblings. We see Dabi has a good relationship with Natsuo, but then fast forward to him as an adult, that tune has suddenly changed and he expressed disappointment when Natsuo doesn't die after there's a failed attempt on his life, as it was a wasted opportunity to cause Endeavor pain. Again, we see the same thing happen with Shoto. He switches from being a loving big brother to wanting to kill him multiple times, even at the end of the latest season, after the entire family tried to sacrifice themselves to save him from exploding. He has a rapid change of heart and attitude towards them, to the same people, the same legacy he was hell-bent on destroying. I don't know. It's just very inconsistent to me. So next trait is self-harm. This one is fairly obvious. It is seen in his childhood and adulthood. As a child, Dabi continued to use his quirk after being told that it would harm him if he continued to use it. But despite being privy to this fact, he continued to use his quirk regardless, resulting in critical burns and a self-induced coma, which he obtains by setting himself on fire. As an adult, he continuously uses his quirk, fully well knowing that he's been comatose for years because of this. However, this does not stop him by still playing with fire, literally. Lastly, we have extreme anger. It is clear that Dabi is an angry child in a grown man's body. He can't seem to regulate his anger like a regular person. As a child, he attempts to kill innocent baby Shoto. As an adult, he continues this pursuit, but now he also wants to kill his father. He is so angry that he cannot even recognize that he has literally thrown his life away. Every time he uses his quirk, he is essentially killing himself. Every time he burns down buildings, attacks civilians and children, or even attempts to kill them, he loses even more of his humanity. All for this continuous act of revenge, achieving this ill-placed goal of hurting and killing his father. If that's not an example of extreme anger, I don't know what else is. So those are the 5 traits of BPD that Dabi exhibits. However, BPD umbrellas 4 different subtypes: impulsive, discouraged, petulant, and self-destructive. They all share underlying traits of emotional dysregulation, fear of abandonment, and unstable relationships, but the difference lies in how drastically different they actually manifest themselves. So the impulsive type, this type pertains to a high energy individual living on the edge. They do things without giving it much thought, so they engage in risky and or impulsive behavior if they aren't receiving enough attention. For example, gambling, binge eating, dangerous sexual behaviors, fighting, etc. This impulsivity factor or lack of critical thinking make these individuals dangerous to be around. Now next is the discouraged type. So an individual with this type of BPD has very low self-esteem and intense fear of abandonment, so they tend to be people pleasers, putting their own needs last, which results in their own detriment. They avoid conflict like it's the plague and can be seen as a bit clingy and also very depressed. Next type is the petulant type, and this type is heavily deregulated and can appear as moody. Their emotions can fluctuate between happy and jovial in 1 second, then angry and rage-filled in the next. These mood shifts can last for days or months. They display inappropriate anger and may lash out at loved ones. This type is where splitting behavior occurs. Most often, splitting is the belief that people are all good or all bad. And last but not least is the self-destructive type, and this type sounds like what it is. They are self-destructive, however this can be conscious or unconscious. They like to engage in long-term hurtful acts such as neglecting self-care, skipping meals, self-harm, etc, etc. There's a deep internal wound of self-loathing in these individuals that cause them to behave like this. So I believe Dabi fits into the self-destructive type. I've already touched on how he encompasses this type and how it correlates with his actions earlier, so I don't think I need to repeat it. So yeah. Anyways, that's it for this video. I hope that I've kind of cleared up some of your questions or created new ones on Dabi's character. Dabi was ridiculously hard to try and narrow down. Like, I've been working on his diagnoses for years, literal years. And if I'm being honest, it has kind of deterred me from wanting to post in general. Like, just a little bit. But yeah, so my final diagnosis is that Dabi has self-destructive BPD. If you guys have any other possible diagnosis or diagnoses or takes on his character, please be sure to leave a comment down below and we can get a healthy discussion going on down there. And while you're down there, you might as well just like, comment and subscribe. I'll see you a lot in my next video, and with that, I'm out.